What if the problem isn't your income? It's actually where you're trying to live it. And more importantly, you want to live life, but your country has become too expensive to do it. In this video, this is exactly what we're going to question and tackle, finding out that more and more people have been taking the bigger question into picture and making the bigger move. And it kind of simply comes down, it's not a retirement question, it's more of a math question. This math question is getting harder to ignore. For myself, it was extremely difficult to start ignoring all the signals. Doing a little bit of research, I was surprised. You know that millions of people in their 50s and sometimes even lower and early 60s are caught up in that same scenario. Too old for most employers to look at. And obviously, definitely too young to comfortably retire. Like, you want to retire with some kind of life dignity still. Nothing's worse. You feel like you're doing everything right. You're following the program. You're listening to the rules. You're doing the system. And somehow you still feel like, you're running in that empty place still. All that effort and dedication is basically not adding up to the math it should be that was promised, more or less. And on top of it, it's even worse for many others that have gotten either pushed out, laid off too early. Now that's significant. Obviously, the math is not going to add up entirely at all. And if this kind of sounds familiar or resonates with you, this video is definitely for you. The cost of living didn't creep up. It kind of ran and exploded. Take a look at housing costs that made kind of sense years ago and are completely unrecognizable. How can most people look at even entering the housing market, let alone maintaining it? You take groceries, the next thing that's extremely important, utilities, insurance, and all of these things, all of these cost factors are just moving up in the same direction. When inflation isn't the news story anymore, it's something that you really feel every single day, every single week. And you feel it every time you're trying to exchange your paycheck for the products you're supposed to be getting. Purchasing power is definitely quietly, and in some cases not so quietly, shrinking. While your fixed costs are not. They're going the opposite direction 100%. And they've been trying, I don't know how it is in other countries, but here in Canada, they've been trying to give you incentives to work longer. But, working longer doesn't solve it because the gap keeps widening. So just because you're working longer, just means you're working longer because you literally can't afford to stop. This doesn't give you a better life quality. It just makes you have to work longer. And the math still doesn't add up because at some point you still have to stop. And I think this is it. This is where people are starting to wonder if the problem is even, bigger than just the budget. And this is the part nobody really says out loud. And it's not that you're bad with money. The math just stops working. The math doesn't add up anymore. Like many of us, when you've been doing decades of the right things, the finishing line, the goalpost, it keeps moving. The system was supposed to reward patience, delivering, but it's been delivering pressure instead. Like even like I said, if you had patience, even if you invested something and you worked hard and you put a little money aside for the rainy day and then in retirement, those funds seem to have less buying power every day. The pressure keeps adding up. It's not a personal failure, it's just a structural one. Even so that it's a structural one, these structural problems still land on the individuals. And then this is where most people keep trying to solve the problem that, where you're in, where the country, the city possibly as well, the problem with, they're trying to fix that with a budget solution. And this is the part worth questioning. Standard answers just don't fit the way they used to anymore. And earn more, harder to do when the market sees your age before the resume. Or then they say cut spending. Well, heck, most people already have. But the big ones are the ones that are left. The big ones are your house, your mortgage, your rent, your roof over your head, your transportation, daily living costs just on food. Many, they're trying to wait it out. Maybe something will happen. Maybe there'll be a promotion or something can change. It might be a shift, but waiting while costs rise is just falling further behind slowly. And then downsizing locally. Housing markets in major, North American cities make this a little bit more complicated in some cases, but there's still an option to do that if you're right downtown in the heart of a bigger city. And a lot of people have been finding this has been an option. They'll take their high-end rent or mortgage and then downsize to, a smaller community several hours away. But in many cases, this is the short-term fix. And also, there's a reason why the real estate is much lower in certain locations you're looking at. That old saying, location maybe doesn't have the healthcare options of plentiful. Maybe it doesn't have the proper shopping. And even if it does have the proper shopping, in many cases, because the location is so far and out there, that their cost of living goes up on that end of it. These options used to make sense, but they're kind of running out of room in a lot of cases now. This is completely why people are starting to ask a different question entirely. This is the question I faced, and this is, what if the problem isn't your finance? What if it's your finances where you're trying to live? Not a failure question. It's a geographic, it's a location question, really what it comes down to. Same income that feels completely inefficient here can feel completely different somewhere else. It's not about running away from something. It's more about recalculating on a purpose, on a desire, on a plan, and recalculating in the sense of not just cost effectiveness, but quality of life. This is another one that's huge. Your first reaction for many people when they're facing this is they assume you have to have earn more to fix that gap, that ever widening gap. But it has become a more popular trend, and we're starting to realize the gap disappears significantly when the cost structure changes. That's simply just a different solution to the same problem. And I'm not talking about a vacation. I'm talking about a completely different way of structuring your life. And it's a big step. Somewhere, with a lower cost basically isn't exotic anymore. It isn't, this paradise in a sense, going and just living out on the beach for a while, but, it becomes practical. And the bonus on it, it is an exotic place, and it actually becomes practical and exotic at the same time. More people are doing this in their 50s and 60s and finding out it works, and I'm running into more people that are starting to do this even at a younger age. I mean, I wish I would have done this a lot sooner. The question isn't whether it's actually possible, because it clearly is. The question is whether it's the right fit for you specifically. And that's a different conversation that, than most people are actually having. And it has to start with being honest about what you're actually trying to solve. And this is an inner battle that you have to face, and what you truly want. But you got to be completely honest with yourself. What is your expectations that you want? What are you willing to sort of sacrifice? What to gain? The hardcore question is, you have to be completely honest with yourself in the sense of, are you hanging on to this thing that you've built up for decades because you thought this is what's going to give you the proper outcome? Are you willing to look at it that it might have been the wrong direction? And for me personally, I'm just saying for me personally, it was kind of almost like an ego attack for me. So I had to really be honest with myself and let my guard down so I could give it a proper perspective. The Philippines became part of the recalculation, not just because of the beaches, although they're there and they're beautiful and it's wonderful, because the cost of living created breathing room. It gave me a sigh of relief, that I haven't felt in years. It gave me the word freedom and the meaning of what it can actually mean. So in retirement income that felt tight or almost impossible, or definitely paycheck to paycheck, and in many cases for people, it's almost like a falling behind all the time, stretched to a completely different way after doing this type of decision. The pressure didn't just reduce, it mostly disappeared. Just to be clear, I'm not selling this as the answer. I'm just using it as an example, what is possible. And it's definitely working for me. The point is the idea, not the specific location. For me, this is perfect, worked out quite well for many reasons. There's culture, there's language, there's visa, there's a whole bunch of reasons why that I did a mathematical checklist. And if you're interested about that, by all means, you're definitely on the right channel. And if you have any questions and stuff like that, by all means, drop them in the comments. I do enjoy engaging. I can also speak for personal experiences. I find a lot of expats, retirees actually find when they get there, completely definitely less financial pressure and actually more living life. Like more often I hear all this, like, wow, one of the biggest things that they say is, I wish I would have done this sooner. When monthly costs that are a fraction of what they used to be back home, time that used to go to chasing money, going somewhere else instead, is a much better way of living. English is widely spoken here, which, removes a lot of significant barriers as well. I mean, I am trying to learn the local language. The climate is, warm year round. That's another thing that's huge for me, because I don't do very well in the cold weather anymore. And I think for a lot of us that are getting older, have that same issue. You know, a slower pace that stops feeling like a compromise, starts feeling like a choice, the proper choice. Life that income, you know, alone back home couldn't readily, you know, you couldn't purchase this. It's kind of a different vibe and energy. To be straight with you and honest, you know, I don't want to sell everything's rosy either. Like, you know, it's not for everybody. It doesn't fit for everybody. Like I just mentioned, the weather is different. Sometimes it's extremely hot. There is a difference in culture, you know, and it does take time to adjust. You know, healthcare, you know, requires real planning. You can't just assume it's going to work the same way. Visa requirements change and need to, you know, be understood before you commit to anything. And there's certain things you have to be aware of. Infrastructure can be inconsistent, you know, brownouts and all these kind of things, depending on where you are, depending how much you need to really rely on internet. Certain things like this, that's not, you know, these are all things that are part of the reality. A lot of people miss family and friends in ways that they didn't anticipate. It makes it too hard for them. You know, every lifestyle has trade-offs, and this is one included. You should go into everything with open eyes for sure. And to be clear, you know, I think when people struggle the most are the ones that run away right away to escape rather than move towards something. That frame of mind makes a big difference. A prime example, no matter where you are in life, if you kind of run from a problem, the problem usually does follow you and catches up with you. If your goal is to recalculate deliberately, the outcome tends to look a lot different and a lot more in your favor, for sure. Being clear on what you're actually trying to solve, you know, this matters before anything, any kind of move. And the important question to really ask yourself is, you know, it isn't, can I afford to live there? That's pretty much almost a no-brainer. The question that you really want to ask yourself, what do I actually want to feel like? What does my life should feel like? Answer that one first. You know, then it's just a place on the map. And if this seems to fit, then that's the next step. That order of thinking matters most, you know, matters more than most people actually realize. And this video isn't really about just the Philippines. I mean, I'm choosing the Philippines for many reasons. And by anybody that's interested in learning more, by all means, engage and ask questions. But it's about a bigger question. What if the goal isn't really to earn more money, but is to live somewhere where the money you have can finally do what you needed to do all along? This is the bigger question. Philippines is one example, and it's a perfect example for me because I'm living it. So I have the most knowledge on it. I can share that, and I enjoy sharing that. It's not necessarily the destination itself. For many people, it might be somewhere completely else. The real idea here is that, you know, it's just the location, the country. It's the variable. Most people never really think to adjust. It's that one variable that can really change your whole outcome and your whole way of living. This can change how you live your life that, you know, earning more rarely does. This is another key factor because it's not really always about the money. It's about what the money can buy for you and how you want to live your life. That's just a recalculation. That's worth having, not having that deep question, asking yourself the true, honest questions. And not everyone is going to land in Asia, you know, and that's fine. They may have, there's other locations. Maybe a lot of people will say, even in their own country, they can move out to a more isolated area. That's just fine for them. You know, it's really reanalyzing the key factor is moving your situation, because the real problem was the gap, when we're stuck in that gap of what you're earning to what you can be living on, and then on top of that, living comfortably. Because quite frankly, the gap is the enemy. That's the battle we all have to face and learn to deal with. So anyway, that was a quick little summary of what I was thinking. I wanted to share with you. If you have any questions, I really do appreciate the engagement. Follow along. I appreciate all the support and the likes and the comments. Everybody, I hope to see you on another one. Everybody take care, and thank you.